Hello, and welcome back to the Going Off Track podcast. I am Kathryn, and that was the Japanese Grand Prix, the last of our first three races of the season, and now we're on spring break. Is this weird? Incredibly. Was racing great last night? Not particularly. Were there moments of excitement? Yes, but we've had that for the first three races. I think that F1, all of the teams, and the FIA itself have a ton of work to do before we come back in Miami, which, as I have said before, Miami is really not the track that you want to start fresh on, but what do I know? I just sit here in my living room and ramble about Formula One for hours on end. Now, before I get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe so I can continue to inflict my motorsport opinions upon the greater population. If you are listening to this on your preferred podcast platform, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Like I said, more people to inflict my opinions on. Now, as you can see, if you are watching this on YouTube, I am wearing Mercedes gear. This is for Kimi Antonelli only. I promise. So speaking of Kimi Antonelli, he is now the youngest championship leader in the history of F1. That is kind of a big deal. We'll see how long it lasts. I think the upheaval will probably primarily be between Kimi and George as the season goes on, but it's nice to see Kimi up on top. Obviously, we have learned very well that there was a reason Toto Wolff put Kimi in the car. We were wrong, and we know we're wrong, and Kimi has now won back-to-back races, and George is actually quite upset about it, but mostly because his car kind of betrayed him. We'll get to George in a minute. But obviously, all of this came to be that Kimi overcame another absolutely terrible race start. Toto Wolff has been joking post-race about sending Kimi back to driving school. And I think that when Kimi learned to drive, he learned to drive on an automatic, not a manual, which obviously the F1 cars are a really weird souped up type of manual car, not an automatic. So I just think it's funny. It's like, oh, Kimi just got his driver's license, but also has to go back to driving school and learn how to, properly start driving an F1 car off the line, because if this comes down to, Kimi being one of the championship contenders late in the season, Kimi's going to need to learn how to get off the line well so that he's not fighting back from P6 like he had to do last night. Time is weird. And also not rely on the misfortunes of other people like his very good friend Ollie Bearman. And I think he kind of owes Ollie Bearman a fruit basket and also probably like a knee brace or a bunch of knee breaks and some ice packs after what happened. And to talk about, Ollie Bearman, obviously he crashed. There was a well-timed safety car at the same time that Kimi needed it. Right. The lap after George pitted from the lead. Awkward. Sorry, George. Not sorry. We know how not sorry we are about this. But Ollie's crash was quite scary. Obviously, we know that it was a 50G crash. That is a lot of impact on his very tall string bean of a body. And I think the biggest concern was obviously when the cameras cut to him and he was limping and, accepting help from the marshals nearby where he crashed so that he could walk off and take a seat. Now, fortunately, he was able to get out of the car on his own. As somebody who has seen a lot of knee injuries in sports and has watched a lot of sports, is currently watching a sporting event on the television that is next to me, but also reflected in this giant mirror I have in my living room, that knee injuries are very scary. And the fact that Ollie just got away with it with a, probably a very severely bruised knee, which been there, done that. Don't bash your knee into a screw poking out of the back of a golf cart seat. It is very painful. But Ollie's crash really has highlighted a lot of the complaints that the drivers have had about the safety features of these cars and the speeds that these cars are able to get up to, but also how to utilize that speed potential safely. And right now, they're obviously still working out the kinks on how to fix this and continue, in keeping with the same motorsport racing spectacle that makes Formula One so entertaining, but also, pandering to special interests and etc. But the FIA did release a statement this morning about the incident, and let's see what they have to say, and then we'll break it down. So the FIA reports Since their introduction, the 2026 regulations have been the subject of ongoing discussions between the FIA, teams, power unit manufacturers, drivers, and the FOM. By design, these regulations include a number of adjustable parameters, particularly in relation to energy management, which allow for optimization based on real-world data, meaning they didn't really know how these regulations were going to work until we actually had cars on track. It has been the consistent position of all stakeholders that a structured review would take place after the opening phase of the season to allow for sufficient data to be gathered and analyzed. A number of meetings are therefore scheduled in April, spring break, to assess the operation of new regulations and to determine whether any refinements are required. That answer is yes. Any potential adjustments, particularly those related to energy management, require careful simulation and detailed analysis. The FIA will continue to work in close and constructive collaboration with all stakeholders to ensure the best possible outcome for the sport, and that safety will always remain a core element of the FIA's mission. At this stage, any speculation regarding the nature of potential changes would be premature. Further updates will be communicated in due course. So what does that mean? It means that the FIA screwed up with their rules, and now they're going to have to scramble to fix them. And they are so beyond grateful for the fact that we have 4 weeks off, even though the reason why we have 4 weeks off is very terrible and awful and stupid and shouldn't have happened in the first place. And we all know this. So fortunately, for a lot of reasons, the FIA has time to fix things. The Formula One teams have time to fix their cars. Everyone has gotten the same data, obviously, give or take the cars that haven't really participated, McLaren. We've had 3 races, so we have a lot of data that we did not have prior to testing and that we also didn't have during testing. Obviously, you can't really test a lot of the long run racing question marks that we have had without actually having long run racing, and simulating those long runs in practice is can only do so much. So we have a lot of data that the teams are going to take into this break before we go back in Miami. And it's really going to be a question of how are the teams going to be able to figure out these cars to get us on the same level that Mercedes is? What is Mercedes going to do during this break? And also, what is the FIA going to do to make sure that we don't have drivers, having 50G crashes and, sliding across the track in front of Franco Colapinto, and I'm sure scaring the ever-living crap out of him when that happened, because that onboard was wild and not in a good way. So it's obviously the FIA can fix things. Will they fix things in a way that's going to satisfy everyone? No. Will they fix things in a way that will satisfy the fundamental desires for good racing in Formula One? That's the hope, but I also don't have a lot of optimism regarding the FIA for well-documented reasons of the last 4 years of this podcast, because, look at who's in charge. But we can only hope that everybody takes these 4 weeks and is able to make some good progress. That's what we want here. I don't want what we've had in these last 3 races, because obviously we've had excitement, obviously we've had racing, obviously we've had good overtaking in moments, but we still haven't had a good full race yet. So that's what I'm really hoping that we're going to start getting. Do I expect that out of a race like Miami and a track that isn't conducive to good Formula One racing? Of course not. So it's not like all is going to be lost the moment that the Miami Grand Prix is a dud or a mixed bag or whatever it ends up being. But we can still hope that the other better tracks on the calendar, my issue with Miami is, among other things, the configuration of the track itself is not conducive for good racing. And that there are other tracks after Miami that will really give us that good information. And we're still in such an early stage of the season, especially in the light of losing Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. And for more on why, I have that linked above. But there are a lot of things that need to be worked on. So is this a good time? Yes. Is this a good time in general? No, because we just got off of 3 months of no vroom cars, and now we're going back to another solid month of no vroom cars. But whatever. But what I am really happy about is Oscar Piastri, because he looked pretty good. And I mean, I don't think we've seen this version of Oscar Piastri, this type of Oscar Piastri racing for a while, and is part of the reasons why McLaren decided to hand Lando last year's World Championship instead of supporting Oscar. But this was some of the best racing that we've seen out of him this season. Obviously, there's so many questions like, could he have won that Grand Prix? Was there any hope? No, it's yes, no, etc. Are we ever really going to know based off, of what could have happened had Ollie Bearman not had that crash and had there not been that safety car right afterward? Obviously, these are things that we'll never know. But considering how much Oscar struggled in the latter half of the season for so many reasons, this was really good to see of him in one of his better drives. And as he said, it's so much fun to actually be driving the cars instead of just watching the cars drive on by him while he sits in the garage or on the pit wall and watches because his car is so broken. And we'll talk about broken cars in a second. And then Charles Leclerc rounds out the podium. He held off George for P3, used some late heroics to keep George behind him, which was really kind of the most excitement of the second half of the race. And, it was, a 10 o'clock race start for me is not that late, but when it gets to the point where I'm like, I kind of want to go to bed and I can't because I got to watch some cars go driving very fast. At the very least, between the Charles and George fighting and the Lando and Lewis fighting, we got some excitement. I will say still overall, the Ferrari weekend was a kind of a mixed bag. All of the cars are clearly showing issues with this energy, battery management, energy charging question marks that everyone's still trying to learn how it works, how to deploy it, how to not overdo it when you're deploying it. These are all things that are very new to everyone. So this isn't like Lewis Hamilton has so much more experience because he's Lewis Hamilton versus Lando Norris, who has been in Formula One for a lot less time than Lewis has. So there's a lot of questions, and that's also detracting from the overall racing, because it's like, Lewis Hamilton had a great overtake that he couldn't hold on to. And, yes, it was easier to hold on to your overtakes in the previous generation of cars, but it was still a lot harder to overtake itself. So I think like I said, there's still a lot that F1 needs to work on, and we'll see how it goes. Now, to move on to who else impressed. Shocker of all shockers, I am acknowledging the existence of Alpine, because Pierre Gasly managed to hold off Max Verstappen for basically the entire race, because that's exactly how much trouble Red Bull is in right now. Awkward. But Pierre Gasly has been looking pretty solid. Obviously, anything is better than the season that we had in 2025 with Alpine, where they were absolutely nowhere. So I think that this is putting Alpine in that same realm of, say, Williams and Audi, where like sometimes we'll see them get a point or two in that like lower half of the midfield, which is definitely where we don't want Red Bull to be, as a Red Bull fan who is ironically wearing a Mercedes shirt today. Like I said, it's for this guy. It's not for any other reason but this guy. So, but speaking of the Red Bull family of networks, Liam Lawson also had a pretty decent drive. I'm not going to say he's come into his own quite yet at Racing Bulls, but he is improving. He's really settling into the car, into the team. He was in the points again. He finished ahead of both his teammate, Arvid Lindblad, who struggled pretty much all weekend, and Isaac Hadjar. I will say Lindblad did have some pretty decent moments. Hadjar, not so much, but then again, neither did Max. So at least there's that. And then to round out who else impressed, got to go with Esteban Ocon. He was finally in the points. He still has a lot of work to do with his car. Obviously, Ollie Bearman has really come out as the stronger driver in the Haas team, and Ocon really should be in that position considering he has so much more experience. But happy that Haas is still on this charge right now. Who would have thought? Certainly not me. Now, moving on to who disappointed. I'm not, maybe this section should really be like, this was kind of a bummer, but obviously George Russell did not have the weekend that he wanted, which was disappointing for him. So we'll keep with disappointed, I guess. But George, his car the setup wasn't exactly where he wanted it to be. He didn't really have everything that he wanted out of the car. Obviously, there was the terrible timing of his pit stop where one lap later Ollie Bearman is going into the wall and everybody gets shorter pit stops except him because he's already pitted. So that was really unfortunate for him. The pit stop wasn't mistimed. It was just very unlucky. And of course, I'm sure he's not thrilled that he's not leading the world championship anymore. And I will say that, like, the battery issues, reliability are things that are continuing. You know, it's not, you know, Mercedes hasn't perfected everything. Those are things that all the teams need to be concerned about. And there were some energy management issues when George was fighting for position that those are bugs that Mercedes is going to want to squash during this little break. And then, of course, Red Bull brought some upgrades. They're not working yet. Obviously, Max Verstappen was stuck behind Pierre Gasly all race. Hajar was down in P12. This is not where anyone at Red Bull wants them to be. Red Bull is not a team that should be fighting in the midfield where they are right now. And we're going to talk about where the constructors are in a second. Max, of course, has been saying that if he's not having fun anymore, he'll just quit after 2026, which, cool, good for him. He's a 4-time world champion. He's done all there is to do in Formula One. Like, he's good. I don't think this is a case of like, take your crayons and go home. And if Max wants to do other things, Max is, you know, finally at a point in his life where he's allowed to make those decisions. Because if you remember, Max was a driving savant, entered Formula One at 17, and he's done all there is to do in Formula One, and his father can live vicariously through him in other forms of motor racing. Is all I'm going to say for that. But yeah, the real thing about Max is Max will either, he could very well quit at the end of the 2026 season, and I will have to find myself another driver. It will probably be Isaac Hajar or, you know, Kimi. But if he stays, he will just retire after 2028 when his contract at Red Bull runs out. And that should come to no surprise to anyone. And the other really interesting bit of disappointing news is Lando's batteries. Now, at the very beginning of this week, McLaren shared that the battery pack that Lando tried to use in the car in China, that was the reason why they could not start his car and therefore could not start the race, is basically unfixable, leaving him with 2 batteries left in his allocations this season. Now, if you don't know, every team, every driver gets a set amount of engine components that they can use for free throughout the season. So you get 3 battery packs for one season, and then if you run out of those 3 battery packs and you need to use a 4th, you can use a 4th, but you will have to take a grid penalty in order to use it. Now, we haven't really seen a lot of that in the last, I'd say the last year or so, really. Like, typically this is a thing that, like, you would be watching Formula One. If you're newer to Formula One, you would be watching the sport, and then toward that latter half of the season, like one race, you'll have, you know, let's say Max Verstappen, he's killing it, but he's running out of power unit components, and he's going to take a power unit outside of his allocation, and he's going to have to start from, you know, the middle of the field or the back of the field. But the benefit is he's got a shiny new power unit in the back of his car, and so he's going to use that like a rocket ship. So that's really, it's kind of that like give and take kind of thing that everybody needs to think about as they're going through their seasons. And obviously things like crashes will have an impact on how many elements are available that are not broken. And so basically whatever happened in this power unit that they tried to put in Lando's car in China is apparently unfixable. So that leads him down to 2 batteries left in his allocation this season. And then the second one had to be replaced during free practice 3. So now he's down to 1 battery. And now one or both of those batteries that have so far failed may be fixable, may be eventually found to be fixable, or it means that he's going to have to take a grid penalty if he takes more and more outside of this allocation this season. And now, if you are very curious to where everybody stands with their power unit allocations and where they're, you know, who is using what, the FIA, if you don't know, the FIA shares all of its decision documents. If you go to FIA.com/documents, it will lead you to where you can find for every race, all of the documents. You know, when somebody gets summoned to the stewards, it's those big, you know, those letters that are shared all the time on social media. Those are free to find on the FIA's website. And going into the Japanese Grand Prix, they will share in what's called the technical delegates report, which I'm looking at right now, that's which driver has used how many elements of their power unit and their energy storage and their exhaust set and their power unit ancillary components and their turbochargers. So all of these things are very well organized and you can see them laid out. And then there's another technical delegate report that shows who is using what element. So there's a section here that says the following drivers will start the third competition of the 2026 Formula One World Championship with a new energy store unit, the ES. And that is number, car, driver, previously used. So for the first one was Lando and the second one was actually Lance Stroll. And it says that the energy store unit used above by the drivers is one of the 3 new energy store units allowed for the 2026 championship season. And this is in conformity with the specific sporting regulation rule. So you can see all of that information laid out right in front of you going into the race weekend. So that is something to keep an eye on. I mean, they'll obviously, tell you during the broadcast, especially if there is a driver that's going to be taking a penalty, but that's going to be something to keep an eye on, especially as these reliability question marks continue. And speaking of reliability, also congratulations to Fernando Alonso, who had his first race finish of the season, because the bar is so low at Aston Martin that having one race finish in 3 racing attempts plus a sprint is a thing to be excited about. And of course, Lance Stroll had a water pump issue, so he had to retire the car. But surprise, the car did not break Fernando's hands off, and he was able to continue driving for the entire duration of the race. So good for him. Now, let's talk about the driver standings. Obviously, we know that Kimi Antonelli is in the lead of the Drivers' Championship after the first 3 races of the season. He's got 72 points. He is 9 points ahead of his teammate, George Russell, and it very well could be a Kimi and George fight all the way down to the end, to Abu Dhabi. We shall see. In P3, we've got Charles Leclerc. He's got 49 points, and then 8 points behind him in P4 is Lewis Hamilton. So we've got 2 Mercedes and 2 Ferraris, and then 2 McLarens. In P5 and P6, we've got Lando, who's got 25 points, and Oscar, who's got 21 points, because Oscar has finally managed to finish a race, start a race, finish a race. It's good for him. P7, Ollie Bearman still with those 17 points. Pierre Gasly is in P8 with 15. Max Verstappen is stuck in P9, super awkward, with 12 points. And Liam Lawson is in P10 with 10 points. There are also currently 6 drivers who have yet to finish in the points this season. We've got Nico Hülkenberg at Audi, Alex Albon at Williams, Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez in Cadillac, and of course, Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll in the Aston Martins. Obviously, Bottas and Perez, yes, finishing in the points would be great for Cadillac. Are we going to see that anytime the first half of the season? Probably not, unless something really weird happens, but you never know. And then on the constructor side, Mercedes is pretty clear ahead. They've got 135 points in the lead, while Ferrari is second with 90. McLaren has 46 points, so there's that significant drop off. Obviously, McLaren had a full race where there were no points scored. That's not very helpful. P4, still our boys at Haas. They added 1 point to their total because Esteban Ocon did actually finally manage to score a single point for the team. And then, of course, up in P5 somehow is Alpine with 16 points. They are tied with Red Bull, but due to the fact that Gasly finished ahead of Max, that is why Alpine is in P5 and Red Bull is in P6, which is not really a place where we see Red Bull all that often, and I do not like it. In P7, we have Racing Bulls right behind them with 2 points back. And then we have a big fall off of points. Racing Bulls has 14 points, and then in P8 we have Audi with 2 whole points and Williams also with 2 whole points, and then Cadillac and Aston Martin are in P10 and P11 with none points at all. So very interesting constructors championship standings at the moment. Can you stop trying to knock my new desk over, because it is clearly not very stable? Thank you, Kat. The cat has decided to wake up from her nap and come visit. Now, let's break down my predictions for no, seriously, can you stop that? For the Japanese Grand Prix. I picked the correct pole sitter again. Thank you, Kimi. So I have 1 point for pole. For the podium, I picked a Kimi, Charles, and George podium. I was close. I picked 2 drivers, but it was a Kimi, Oscar Piastri, Charles Leclerc podium. So I picked a second Mercedes over a McLaren. It was exactly where you thought I would be picking, and was surprised. In P10, I picked Carlos Sainz, who did not have all that great of a weekend, and it was Esteban Ocon, as we know. And then for surprise and dumb, my surprise was that Red Bull's upgrades were going to work, and they fully did not. And for my dumb of the weekend, I voted the Audi fumble. And, both Audi drivers finished kind of, just outside the points, but they did not look all that great this weekend. So I'm giving myself that credit. Final thoughts. I know I've been talking for almost a full half hour now, but final thoughts are Formula One has work to do. They need to fix it. They need to make things right. That statement was not really giving us a lot of confidence that they're gonna do it, but we can only hope and pray and hope and pray. And it's, we really need to make sure that the driver safety is being prioritized. The crash had a little bit of shades of the crash that Jack Doohan had last year, where there was an issue with the DRS flap of his car, so it wasn't completely the same, but it was a similar amount of G-force involved in the crash. And so that's, if Formula One wants to make this like the fastest cars on the planet, they need to make them fast, but also need to make it so you can drive fast safely. Will they do that? We'll see. Remains to be seen. But anyway, let's move on to our off-track moment of the weekend. And I think we've got, I settled with one, and then there was a second one that came on right before the race. So our first off-track moment of the weekend is, of course, Fernando Alonso and the baby news. Can't not be that. He was not at the media day and spent an extra day at home so that he could be with his partner, Spanish journalist Melissa Jimenez. And the baby is here. The baby is healthy. Very exciting for him. I expect we will see Fernando teaming up with the baby in F1 in about 2045. Yes, if you know how math works, the baby will be turning 18 in 2044, but due to the Max Verstappen super license rule, that means that drivers have to be 18 at the time of their first F1 race. Baby Alonso Jimenez, named to be decided / announced, will not be old enough to start participating in Formula One in time for the 2044 season, especially if the 2044 season starts at the beginning of March and the baby doesn't turn 18 until the end of the month. Yes, we're thinking way too deeply about this, but Fernando and baby Fernanda, we don't know, will be on the grid together in about 18 years. So exciting for them, because, Fernando's just never going to retire unless he retires in the next year or two. But you never know. And then the other off-track moment, my little honorable mention, I think has to go to the rock orchestral rendition of the Japanese national anthem that they played before the race. Because I was watching it, I was like, really? We're doing that? That was cool. That was fun. I was very entertained by that. So coming up next, nothing for 4.5 weeks. F1 is off until we go to Miami in May. And that said, I have an announcement to make, and I'm going to be making that announcement on the 31st. It is the 29th as I am recording this, so in 2 days, I will be saying something. So don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications so you don't miss what I am going to announce. That's what I've got for you today. Thanks for going off track with me, and I will see you in 2 days with things to say as we go into the F1 spring break.